AI doesn't remove the human from design. It actually makes the human harder to ignore.
I'm Sam G, a triple registered architect who has practiced across South Africa, Australia, and the USA. This is your design passport. Real stories, practical pathways, and global design ideas to help you build a career and a life that travels with you. Ready? Let's stamp your passport. Welcome back to Your Design Passport, the podcast where we explore architecture and design career journeys and the ideas shaping the future of the profession. Few topics in architecture right now are creating as much curiosity, excitement, anxiety, and debate as artificial intelligence. But somewhere between the hype and the fear is a more important question. What does AI actually mean for architects working in practice today? How are different countries and firms adopting AI differently? And what skills will help international architects remain valuable and competitive as the profession evolves? Today's guest is Samantha Flores from Corgan, whose work sits at the intersection of architecture, innovation, and emerging technology. Samantha approaches AI not simply as a technology trend, but as something that is actively reshaping workflows, collaboration, and the way architects think about design and problem solving. And I think that's an increasingly important conversation for the industry right now. In today's episode, we talk about how AI is already being used inside architecture firms, what architects often misunderstand about the technology, the skills that may become more valuable in the future, and how emerging professionals can prepare for an industry that is evolving rapidly. Samantha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Start at the beginning. What originally drew you towards architecture and innovation?
I always loved building things, doing things with my hands, designing things, and naturally was drawn to architecture because you can do all of those things with one profession. I also had influences in my life that were architects, so they probably very easily pushed me towards architecture. The thing that was a little bit different for me than my influencers was that I was very interested in human behavior, and I was interested in why people were drawn to specific spaces or places, or what it smelled like in those spaces, or maybe even like what spot the light hits you the best and warms you up in a space. And I always thought that those little quirks about me and me wondering why people enjoy the spaces that they do were, like I said, quirks. But it turns out that I just had a fascination for human behavior, and that's where my career has really led me.
What point did you begin becoming interested in AI and emerging technologies within the design industry?
As an emerging architect, I started my career in aviation, and I was on our international aviation design team. So I was doing a lot of competitive work. And when you're in that cycle, it's like a 3 month sprint cycle. You do a design for 3 months, see if you win that competition. If you don't, you get on to another one. Thankfully, we won a few. And so I was either constantly designing for different countries, so from the US. So I was having to learn about all of these different countries and different human behaviors and traditions and norms of travelers from my laptop in the US, or on the projects that we did win, like the one that we won was a Shanghai International satellite terminal. And in that particular project, I went and lived in Shanghai for about a year and a half. And not only did I do a lot of research, desk research, but I was then fully immersed in the culture. And so I was constantly wondering, what are the norms? What are the traditions that we should be designing for? What technologies are people adopting? Do they use the same technology that we have in the US? Do they use different technology? What would be easiest for them to move through this terminal? How do they navigate? So I'm asking a lot of different questions, just to make sure that I'm giving the passengers the best and least stressful experience for this terminal that we were designing. And because I was doing that consistently on these 3 month sprints or year-long sprints, I got really deep and very fascinated in human behavior as it pertains to the adoption of technology. And that led me to creating the group that I am the director of at Corgan, which is Hugo, and that's Corgan's Research and Innovations Group. And what started was intersection of human behavior and emerging technology has just accelerated in the past few years, as you can imagine, with the adoption of AI and really understanding not just how we can change the design of the buildings that we're working on the boards today, but also how do we change our own workflows? How is this changing the way that we cognitively adapt to the work that we are doing? How does this change the way that we have interpersonal relationships in the office? And so now with AI, there are a lot of different things that we're examining that we just never really tapped into before.
Was there a particular moment where you realized AI is not just a future conversation, that it's something that's already taking place and changing practice right now?
Several years ago, we started an annual book called the Curiosity Report. And in that report, we would look at future technologies and try to really forecast out 10, 20 years what it would be like to work in the architecture field. And one of those technologies was AI. And when we were writing the piece for I remember sitting there thinking, like, man, doesn't this sound dreamy that I can think of something that I want to design and then have the computer do a few iterations while I'm out at lunch, and then have it also think about how it's going to 3D print this so I can have a model. I remember thinking these agents are going to be fascinating for the way that we work. We thought it was maybe 5 to 7 years out. Then we had the pandemic, and it came on a little bit quicker. And I do remember when we started adopting AI throughout the company, how quickly everyone caught on. Some of the programs are extremely intuitive, and there were a lot of questions at first and a little bit of resistance in, well, this is going to take over the creative process. This is going to take over the part that I enjoy the most about my job. AI has taken over tasks that are mundane, that people feel are a weight lifted off of their shoulders. But there are times where people feel that because we are using AI, we're moving at such a fast pace and we are able to now see what types of work streams we can create. They're just given more work. And so it's a lot of code switching between projects. It's a heavier cognitive load on people, and it's wearing them down by the end of the day.
We're finding the same thing in our firm. We understand that it is improving workflows, but it's finding that balance between where is it actually improving workflows and where is it just a cog and it's not allowing you to move on.
I mentioned that it's helping with interpersonal relationships, but I'm also finding that there are a few people who will answer an email using their Copilot, and then the email that comes back to them has them using Copilot, and you kind of wonder, are there humans writing these emails, or are we just sending emails back and forth and our AI agents are reading them?
We actually had an instance the other day because a lot of people have their AI agents going into meetings. So normally the AI agent will jump in the meeting like a few seconds before the meeting starts or a couple minutes. And then someone else's AI agent jumped in there and they were busy having a meeting with one another. So
Oh
they
my
were
goodness.
busy talking about the project and no one was even there. And then we're like, what on earth is happening? So we're like, and kick them out.
Ooh, that's a little scary. Hope that wasn't a confidential project.
Luckily not. And what do you think architects are most afraid of when it comes to AI? And do you think those fears are justified?
I actually do. A lot of architects are fearful that that AI will replace them. And anytime we talk about emerging technology, and this has been part of my career for 10 years now, is helping people understand that job replacement is a part of the cycle of work. I always remind people that we don't have lamplighters on the streets anymore. We don't have elevator valets. We don't have a lot of different, we don't have carriages. We don't have horses running in the street. Like with technology comes an evolution. And with that evolution, there is going to be job loss, but there's also a gain in the workforce in a different way. There's also an evolution of the workforce. And so it's a helpful reminder that we've been through this for years. We've been through this time and time and time again. That's the one thing that architects are most concerned about and are constantly justifying their creativity and the humanity that they bring to their work and how that cannot be replaced. What I think when we start to forecast out what AI can do for us, there eventually will be a lot of different ways that AI can replace the work that we do. However, I will say currently my team, we have different teams across the company, and anything that they do in their workflow as part of the design process, like gathering images on Pinterest and saving them down to a file. We did every single process throughout that design project with AI, just shadowing them. And we found ways that we could streamline work for sure. And we also found ways or areas where AI just is not up to snuff. And a lot of that has to do with bringing the humanity from the client and the client's goals and needs into the project. Now, there are parts of the process that can be replaced today, and I say replaced. I use that very lightly because I still think that in every part of our work, we're going to want to have agency and we're going to want to have ownership. And so, or at least for me, if I get into ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude and say, "Hey, create this image for me. I need it to look like X, Y, and Z." I'm also going to want to take that into Photoshop and make some tweaks on my own and add some design work to it. So I don't think humans are going to let go that quickly. What I will say is a lot of people rest on the idea that, well, AI can't build physical things. It can. We've worked with concrete 3D printers before. And not saying that those are fully AI capable, but at some point there will be a collapse in the design process where you can design floor plans using a generative AI from an LLM, and you will be able to send that to a concrete 3D printer as long as you have the site. The site eventually we could see robotic construction workers preparing the site and then see a 3D printed concrete building. Now, the human isn't completely removed from that process. Humans have to set up the printer, humans have to prepare the site. Today, humans have to create those drawings. And there is not an AI right now that can create drawings that can go straight into construction. So there is an evolution of our workflow. It will not replace us immediately, and we're all out of a job tomorrow. I do see that we will embrace that workflow. We will understand the nuances, and we will find ways to adapt and evolve. So I'm not fearful of the replacement, but I am aware of it. And I think as long as we as architects stay aware of where our job can evolve and where we might be replaced, then we can also adapt easily.
We also need to take charge of the technology because if we leave anyone else in charge of creating these systems, it just means that architects are going to become more removed from the process. So the more that we understand the process and the more that we help develop the process, the more we can actually secure our positions in architecture moving forward.
Absolutely. I personally think that this is going to give us a much better opportunity to harken back to the days where the architect was a master designer. I really do think that because AI is not always going to think. For example, there is a building by Snøhetta in Norway. It's the Oslo Opera House. And a few things that I love about this building. One, there is a textured panel on the exterior, and it's all these little dots. And those little dots are actually Braille for one of Oslo's most famous operas. That's not something that an AI is going to think this would make a great pattern. I think that that's a human touch that is just not going to be something that an AI today, at least, would think to put into the design. The other thing is the handles, the door handles on the doors inside the building. They're actually the profile of the building. Again, a little touch that humans notice, and at the human scale. The braille is the human scale, the handle is the human scale. These are things that we touch and we interact with that an AI is definitely not going to be touching and interacting in the real world with our buildings. And so I think back to the Frank Lloyd Wrights, who really thought about all of the materiality and the views and where the sun comes in and hits you in the face and warms you up and where that cat is going to nap for the day. I think about all of those pieces of humanity that are part of architecture that we've actually kind of lost as we are learning our programs like Revit, where we are really just, at Revit's will sometimes. I do think that that type of humanity will creep back into the work that we do. And that's where we're going to have our agency and ownership, is bringing that human empathy back into the world of architecture.
Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Your Design Passport. It helps more globally minded architects find this show. And if you're considering working internationally and don't want to feel like you're starting over, I've created a free guide called the International Architect Starter Map. It walks you through the exact strategic questions you should answer before touching a single application form. You can download that in the show notes. From your perspective, do you see differences in how architecture firms in the United States are approaching AI compared to firms in other countries? Are there particular regions or markets that seem more advanced or more hesitant when coming to adopting these technologies?
When we think about architecture globally and who is and isn't adopting I think there is a push in the US to adopt AI as quickly as possible and to understand its efficiencies. And I think that's because our country is so heavily focused on financial value of companies. I think that there is a one-sided perspective that if we adopt AI as quickly as possible across all of our market sectors, then we could reduce the cost of having humans at a desk every day, could reduce the cost of having a laptop at a desk every day, and all the things that come with that. We could just run our little AI machines and they can do all the work for less, which is absolutely not true. I do think that there are other countries that are adopting it a little bit slower at a much more scaled pace. I think that places like Denmark, for example, or any of the Scandinavian countries have always been more heavily focused on the craft of architecture, and therefore they're not adopting it at the same pace that the US is, particularly because it's not part of their practice to let technology drive the design project as it is here in the US, or what I've experienced with moving from AutoCAD to Revit, through SketchUp, through 3D Max, through Maya, and using all of these programs to get us to a singular point of design. Whereas some of the more Scandinavian countries are so much more focused on human touch and human technology. We are seeing a slower adoption of AI. I don't even want to say slower. I want to say a much more measured pace of adoption. in some of those firms.
So, with that being said, do you think that in the US that we should try and slow things down? How should we try and slow that down, and where should we focus? Where should we focus our AI efforts?
I think where architects could slow down is by returning to a lot more of a measured conceptual phase. So, what we typically do in a project before we had AI is we would go through this process of understanding the client and really driving into what the meaning of the project was and really trying to focus on materiality and space and honing in on those and then moving towards one, two, maybe three concepts. Now with AI, it's let's type all of that into an LLM. Let's get 20 different concepts or even 100. Why not? It can do all of these. And then we'll just kind of narrow down from there. What I think would be best is a hybrid approach is to really go back to understanding the client's goals and the materiality of the space and the natural geography of the space and to really interpret that through the lens that being an architect gives us and bring in that human experience and empathize with the end users and bring in all of that data, then start to kind of craft using AI, start to craft your designs. AI really helps us see patterns that humans miss. AI can help us understand movement patterns. It can help us understand occupancy trends, environmental sensor data, user feedback, and it can even go to the level of doing social media scans and filtering for service interactions. And so those types of things could help us look at our buildings and see where we have an opportunity to make an experience better for humans. And I think that gathering data on that type of human perspective and letting AI help us analyze and synthesize down to specific insights will then drive design in a different direction that's much more human than do 20 iterations for me and let me just pick the prettiest one.
I love that. I think many younger architects are possibly wondering, what skills do I actually need to focus on and to develop right now? What advice would you give emerging professionals entering the industry today?
I started the conversation this way, and this would always be my advice, is architecture is made for humans. A house is made for humans to live in. A workplace is made for humans to work in. I mean, parks are made for humans to have leisure time in. I think historically buildings are often designed around the average user, but human behavior is not average. And AI can really help us dig into that. If I were giving advice to emerging professionals now, it would really be understand your user, understand their preferences, understand where they're going to have friction in the space, and really try to tailor a design to support their needs. And I think from there, we typically, as architects, or at least whenever I was in school, we always had a rendering that was a 3,000 foot, or maybe not 3,000 foot, maybe a 300 foot, I don't know, bird's eye view of the building. We had a couple of interior shots, but architecture is the strongest when you think from the person outwards and from that lens outwards. And what are they going to see? AI can really help us tune our environments to be more adaptive and more responsive, especially in sectors like education or workplace, aviation, where I come from, or healthcare, for example. These are some of the most human spaces where we have a lot of our big emotions too. Think about a lot of your emotions are set in high school in an education space. Is there a way that AI could help us really tune in to the human experience, to the teenager experience? Could we design our spaces to better support those students as they're developing this heightened sense of emotions and really start to give back to communities? I think that focusing on the human and focusing on their preferences and their needs and really talking to people about it. That's the advice I would give back to emerging professionals, because those are things that AI will not replace, but can also support. We can find new ways of working in our profession using the convergence of AI and a deep understanding of human behavior and perspective.
How do you think architecture firms may operate differently in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think AI will ultimately make architects more valuable or less valuable?
That's an interesting question. I think that AI will make architecture firms more valuable. I do see there is a value in streamlining workflows. There always will be. There is a lot of financial incentive to move forward a little bit quicker and a little bit better. So I do think AI will be valuable for firms. For architects specifically, I do think that AI will be valuable and will make architects more valuable. However, I do think that there is a fine line to walk with letting AI do your work versus letting AI support and enhance your work. There is also a great opportunity for us to see a little bit more into the future using AI. So when we think about the buildings that we're building, we often as architects think about, okay, this building is going to be built in the next 2 years. I'm designing it to open in the next 2 years, and I'm designing it to last for the next 20 years as that typology before it even gets repositioned or maybe demolished. I think what AI can help us to do is do a little bit more now, next, future planning. Where can help us understand current behavior, help us understand how expectations might shift in that industry or in that market sector, and help us do some trend forecasting so that we can plan different scenarios for that building, plan investment prioritization for either that company or that building operator or property owner. I think that that would help us bring a lot more clarity to the type of work that we're designing and ultimately a little bit more sustainability if we're building our buildings to not only last and endure, but to be able to be flexible and shift to incoming populations and future scenarios.
I think that's an amazing answer. I think I'm going to write that one down for sure. And then on human creativity, do you think conversations around AI are forcing architects to redefine what human creativity actually means? You've touched on this a little bit already.
When it comes to human creativity, I think AI doesn't remove the human from design. It actually makes the human harder to ignore. I think that AI can make architecture, as I've said a couple of much more human centered because it gives us better tools to really understand the actual behavior instead of designing for assumptions, for even things that we've been taught in school, like hierarchy, aesthetics, or precedent. We can really start to understand and tune into that human behavior of who's using our building. One thing we talk about in the research that we do, especially when we're doing research around neurodiversity in the workplace, for example, we design workplaces for the average user. And that is someone who's sitting at a desk on a laptop. That's who we design for today. But when we're doing neurodiversity research, we're looking at people with ADHD, for example, and different lighting levels can change the way that their ability to focus. Different movement throughout the office, if it's not filtered, it can shift their focus so that they're not able to be productive. We test different sounds and smells in the space to see how people react and how they're able to continue through their tasks. Which, by the way, if you put orange peel in your space, we found that that is a really great scent to increase your productivity. So there you go. These are things that AI is not going to put orange peel in your space. You have to do that. But when you look at all of that data together, the sound levels that make you focus, the light levels that make you focus, the scent that makes you focus, you can really start to see how AI might be able to tailor that for specific people, for specific groups of people, for specific conference rooms, or for specific workshops by using AI to maybe increase or make workflows more efficient, as we've been talking a lot about. It'll change the architecture and really expand our ability to understand and predict and design for human behavior. I think it will really allow designers to move beyond just static assumptions about users and towards environments that are really much more responsive, inclusive, more emotionally aware, and more adaptable over time.
I also think that human creativity will come more into play once AI helps you get rid of those admin tasks. So it can do all the admin tasks so that you can actually then focus more on creativity.
Yes, and on that note, I do think it is something everyone needs to be aware of, that AI can also take over the creativity tasks. So you really need to sit down and think about it. What do you want your AI to help you do? And if you are the type of person that loves getting into spreadsheets, but you know that you also need to design this floor plan and that's kind of secondary, then you can have AI help you design that floor plan. If you are like me and colors and graphics and the way that light moves through a rendering, those are things that I want to have agency over. So that spreadsheet is definitely going over to AI. I think it's really you need to tailor your use of AI to where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then together you and AI can be a whole architect that is just one incredible being.
And international architects often bring different ways of thinking, problem solving, and approaching design. As technology changes the profession, do you think internationally trained architects may actually have unique advantages in the future workforce? And do you foresee more overseas trained architects coming to the US?
I actually see it a little bit differently. I was just talking to a coworker about this the other day. So my AirPods, my husband's family is Spanish speaking. And now I can have my AirPods translate the conversation. So I'm a little bit more tuned in. I've been trying to immerse myself in Spanish, but estoy aprendiendo español, pero no hablo español. I think that that has been helpful, that I can understand the conversation and at least participate a little bit more. When it comes to architecture, there are certain countries, Canada or maybe in France, that I'm thinking of right now where I speak French. I do not speak a professional French for the architecture and AEC industry. And so therefore, I would not be able to work in those countries. If I had an AI translator in my ear and I could audibly speak the language, would that enhance my skills so that I could actually use my professional skills in different countries? I wonder if that would be a scenario that's not too far off. And to that point, I think it could augment us in a lot of different ways, because it's not only can I speak the language and converse with contractors in that country, it's also, do I know the codes well enough to design to this building typology? Do I understand the human behavior well enough to design to their specific needs? And I do think that this will be something that'll help us empathize with other countries a lot better across the board. And so, not just other countries coming to the US, but more the US understanding and immersing themselves in other countries and communities so that we can all share our unique design skill sets and build off of one another. So, I do see that there's a possibility that AI can help us with the humanity side of architecture, the skills we've learned in school, but the humanity is something that we really need to hone in on in the workforce. I do see that there's a possibility there.
And what skills or qualities do you think will help candidates stand out moving forward?
You know, adaptability, flexibility, agility. I do not think we are in a world anymore where you've learned one skill in school and that's the skill that is going to take you through your entire career. I think about this often because both my parents, they started their careers at a particular job, and that is where they spent the next 30 years, 40 years. And that's where they retired from. Neither one of them ever left that space. My mom was a speech pathologist at an elementary school. My dad worked for Phillips Petroleum, and they did that their entire careers. That's not, we already know that that's not the landscape for architects. In fact, whenever I entered the workforce, it was starting to become more typical that architects would come into the workforce, stay at a firm for about 3 years, hop, stay at another firm for about 5 years, and then settle at their third location. That was the typical. And I remember that frustrating people that were a little bit more seasoned in the profession. But now I have seen it all. I've seen people come in and stay for 3 months. I've seen people come in and stay for 4 years. I've seen people that are still in the same job 20 years later. So I feel like there is a lot of differences in the way that we approach our careers. And if you've learned skills in school, Just beware that those skills may not take you through your entire career. You will always have to adapt and learn something different. And in my experience, I was trained as an architect. I came in, I got my license, I got a license in interior design, and now I do research in emerging technology and human behavior. And that is not somewhere I thought my career would take me, but that is where I was interested in. And I was able to build a business out of it. And I do think that having those soft skills of adaptability and flexibility and having those mindsets will take you much further than honing in on your rendering skills or the fact that you can put together a restroom in 10 seconds.
And for those architects listening who may feel intimidated by AI or unsure where to start, what's one practical thing that they can do this month to make them more future ready?
AI is really good at helping people get started. That has been one of my favorite things is if I'm ever sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know how to start this, I just jump into one of the LLMs and just get started. I think that that shouldn't be a fear. But yes, it is a fear. You don't know where to go. You don't know how your skills are going to adapt or how you're going to be perceived in the profession. I actually think right now, lots of firms are looking for people who can come in and learn. And that's what students are really good at. Emerging professionals, especially those coming right out of school, one thing that they should use and take advantage of is the fact that they don't know it all. And they can sit there and ask questions, and no one's going to be like, oh, Karen's asking this question again. No, they're going to be like, oh, she just got out of school and she's very interested and she's engaged. Something that you should do as an emerging professional is get into the profession. Remind yourself that you can change, that you can adapt, that you can be flexible, and start asking questions. And don't even think about, is that question stupid or is that question smart? Don't even think about that because you will not be the smartest person in the room and you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And you always want to learn from your peers, or that's been my experience.
Okay, time for the signature moment, the passport stamp question. Think of your career as a passport. What's the stamp that's changed you, shaped you, or surprised you the most?
Well, I think all in one, it's a place, an experience, and a mindset. My work that I did as a designer in the aviation team for the Shanghai International South Satellite Terminal was the inflection point in my career because that was where I did the research, the deepest research into human behavior and really trying to understand a community and a passenger type that I didn't know. That was where I started getting into understanding how the data behind human behavior can change the way that we design. And that was also the time that I was immersed in a culture that I really found so incredibly different from the US and so incredibly beautiful that I just wanted that feeling forever. And after that project was when I created Hugo and when I started building this research and innovation team and really started focusing on the things that I am so much more excited about than just simply architecture and design is implementing the human element into it. And so that would be my stamp in my passport.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Samantha?
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. This conversation is a really important reminder that technology may change the tools architects use, but the human side of architecture still matters deeply. Curiosity, adaptability, communication, creativity, those things remain incredibly valuable. Your design passport just got another stamp. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow in Your Design Passport and share this conversation with an architect or designer trying to navigate the future of the profession. Because every project, every idea, and every new challenge adds another stamp to your professional passport. Until next time, keep sketching, keep dreaming, and keep building your global design career.
You've been listening to Your Design Passport. If you're ready to build a design career and a life that travels with you, hit follow and join me every other week for more global stories, strategies, and inspiration. Until then, keep dreaming, keep designing, and keep collecting those passport stamps.